Okay, here's problem 7 on page 172 of the text. Problem 7 on problem 7 is a UCC problem. Imagine a contract for the sale of a widget. A widget used to be a thing. Now it's something that goes on the web, but widget's a thing. Okay. A movable good. It's $5,000, and B pays $2,000 when the contract is signed. So put some money down. When you see that, think, oh, there's going to be a deposit issue here. Balance is due on delivery. Contract requires delivery to XYZ Transport on June 1st. The expected shipping time by XYZ to B's factory is 3 days. So the deal goes like this. It goes from X to XYZ for transport and then to the buyer. And it's on June 1st. My marker's failing here, but it's on June 1st that it's supposed to be delivered to XYZ, and then it's supposed to get to the buyer on the 4th, okay, because it takes a little bit of time. So S fails to deliver this to XYZ on the 1st. B purchases a substitute widget on June 6th. On June 6th, buys a substitute widget for $6,000, okay? So for $6,000. Now, we didn't deal with this so much in class, but what you see, we didn't deal with this, in fact, at all in class, but what you see is that on June 4th, the market price was $5,000. So the question that this raises is, to what damages is the buyer entitled, okay? Now, we know if the damages are just measured by the $6,000 for the price that the buyer paid in order to finally get the goods, then the buyer is paying $1,000 more than the buyer expected to pay, plus the buyer has put down a $2,000 deposit, so that the buyer's damages, first from 27111, remember we looked at it in class, 27111 enables the buyer in this instance to get back the money that the buyer put down, so that's $2,000. Okay, $2,000 comes back via 27111, and then we figure out the other damages. And here we'd say, since he paid $6,000, which is the cover price, $6,000, subtract from that the contract price, and that's $1,000. So we add these two together, and $3,000 is the amount of damages if $6,000 is the right price. Okay, and what that is if you take a look, I don't think this is going to be visible on screen here, but that's simply cover damages, 27122. The buyer may recover from the seller's damages the difference between the cost of cover and the contract price. Okay, so that in this circumstance is the cost of cover minus the contract price, together with any incidental or consequential damages. So if there were incidentals and consequentials, we would put that in here as well. But remember, this $2,000 comes back. This $2,000 comes back via 27111. 27111, you recall, says that where the seller fails to make delivery, the buyer may cancel, and whether or not he has done so, may, in addition to recovering so much of the price as has been paid. So he gets the $1,000 back plus this $2,000. But here's the wrinkle. 2712 says, after a breach within the preceding section, the buyer may cover by making in good faith and without unreasonable delay any reasonable purchase of or contract to purchase goods in substitution. So notice that in the time between, let's get this onto the screen here, in the time between June 4th, on June 4th when the transaction was to take place, the market price was $5,500, and that market price went up. This means, from the seller's point of view, the buyer, by waiting a day, ran up the damages by $500. The question becomes whether this delay was reasonable. If it's unreasonable to wait that long, then we're going to ding the buyer $500 and say you should have covered on the day of the breach. in which case the damages are only going to be $2,500, right? Because this, instead of, that will knock this back to $5,500, right? That we won't say that it's, that the $6,000 was too much to spend. Where do we get that? Well, if there's something unreasonable about that cover transaction, then we might use 2713 damages instead. And 2713 says it's the difference between the market price at the time when the buyer learned of the breach and the contract price, together with any incidental and consequential damages. So, assuming that the buyer learned of the breach on the 4th when the goods didn't show up, then the measure of damages is the difference between the market price on that day, $5,500, and the contract price of $5,000 plus his $2,000 back, which means that this is only $2,500, okay? And that makes sense if you think about it just for a second, that we expect buyers to cover in the relevant market at the time when they learn of it. At the time when they learn of it, they can go out and say, I'll enter into a substitute transaction. Now, a further problem, I suppose, here could be the fact that the seller doesn't deliver on June 1st, fails to deliver to the shipping company. If the buyer learned that on June 1st this failure had happened, then the buyer could start looking around. Notice, though, the buyer's in a difficult position at that point in time, because the buyer, although he knows it hasn't been delivered to the shipper, he doesn't know for sure that there's not a breach yet. Takes 3 days, but who knows? Maybe the seller's going to deliver the next day and pay a little extra and send it via express or super express, or use the transporter like on Star Trek or something along those lines. So I think it's, but if that were the measure of damages, then the price on that day was $5,000. Okay, so in a market where there are shifting prices, we add another wrinkle, and if you pay attention with regard to buyers and with regard to sellers as well, the simple idea is that when you enter into a substitute transaction or figure out the market price, you want to use the market price of the substitute transaction that's available at the time that the buyer or the seller learns of the breach. So that's problem 7 on page 172.